How good are your listening skills? We might assume that listening is an innate human ability, but in reality, it's a skill that must be cultivated. And often what we think counts as listening isn't listening at all. It's hearing another person while thinking about something else, looking over their shoulder, or waiting for them to finish so we can speak. Deep, active listening is a vital skill for leaders to develop. And here to talk about this topic is Greg Bartlett, Senior Consultant at Impact Australia. Greg, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Dan. Thank you. Appreciate you're on the short straw with an early morning, so I got the good.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us from Australia. Well, let's hear more about you before we get into what we're talking about today. So why don't you introduce yourself in 60 seconds?
Okay, will do. As you can probably tell, I'm not Australian, I'm British. I was born in London, but I had the benefit of growing up in Paris. My mum is French, so a multilingual family. And I grew up in Paris, which was amazing as a kid. And then fast forward, I ended up in the north of England where I met my wife, Naomi. Well, actually in Scotland, when we used to work in an outdoor centre.
Mm.
And then we moved down to the Lake District. My kids were born in the Lake District. And then we moved out here in 2015 as a family, and we've been here for 9 years.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I came across Impact through sort of an evolution of careers that I have had. So financial industry first, then I had enough of that, went to the outdoor education industry, and then a little bit of expedition stuff abroad, and then I sort of married them all together, stumbled across Impact,
Yeah.
the one word of experiential learning, and then 18 years now.
Wow, 18. I was just thinking, it's funny how you think you know your colleagues, but I had no idea you grew up in Paris, so I've learned something about you today. Well, thank you for joining us, and again, appreciate the fact that we're doing this out of traditional work hours. So thank you. Let's get into the topic that we're talking about today. And we're talking about deep, active listening, and looking at it from a leadership context. So, why don't you, first of all, kind of talk a little bit, give us an overview of what we're talking about when we're talking about deep, active listening?
Yeah, sure. And it's sort of stuff that you can read or you can Google, and you can get all sorts of definitions and so forth. And none of those are wrong. I think a lot of stuff is exactly it. But for me, my perspective, it's that moment when, or that level that you're at, where you give someone your full attention, a conversation of full attention, and you're fully in the moment. And I know we hear that phrase, but it's that point where you're not thinking of something else. You're not thinking of the next thing you're going to say. You're not thinking of how you can kind of jump in and add on your piece, and you end up with that point where you're actually immersed in their world. That makes
Mm.
sense. You're listening to something and you're going, right, I'm actually like in it with you. I understand that. I can appreciate it. I can start to, and even picturing it is almost being distracted by your own, right? So it's just fully listening to what's going on, and picking up on all sorts of, wonderful things that go with that. And perhaps, getting to a place in a conversation through that person feels listened to at that level, and then it kind of off somewhere else with it, really.
Mm.
So for me, it's, and I think, honestly, Dan, I think it's a rarity.
Mm. And well, what you were saying before, it's also, I think, with the amount of distractions that are around today, especially if working remotely, you've basically got the internet in front of you,
Mm.
and whenever you're on a call, things can ping off. Maybe it's now a lot harder to really listen, especially when provided with distractions of either in front of us or just what's on the mind.
Yeah.
From a leadership context, then, what is the role of deep, active listening in the leadership toolkit?
Yeah. Start with, leadership. So if leadership is right
Mm.
about inspiring people, getting the best out of people, um, getting outcomes, things done, performance, what have you, through people, and they're at their best. and you get to a point, and that happens through what you're doing. To me, that's leadership.
Hmm.
So if it is about that, then for me, deep listening, active listening is a must. Like it's a core skill, mindset, behavior that allows you to really understand someone, understand their perspective, where they're coming from, not judging yourself, not transposing your own thoughts, your own version of that, your own agenda, etc. Um, then it's an absolute, like it's one of the core pieces. It's like, if there were, I'm making this up, but if there were three skills to learn as a leader to be able to do that, like listening has got to be one of them, right?
Mm.
Um, so for me, it absolutely has um, a very important, very foundational place in a leadership toolkit. Yeah.
So in that case, then we talked in the intro about how it's a skill that can be developed. Maybe if you can, first of all, kind of give some examples of what maybe good versus bad looks like, and then we'll move into what leaders can do to develop their listening skills. So perhaps could you share some examples of what maybe good versus bad looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think listening goes hand in hand with feeling like someone is there and has a presence, right?
Mm,
So an easy example of both of those, with I'm sure we've all got our own examples of this. But you're talking to someone, and I'm going to be extreme about this and
mm,
obvious about it. I'm sitting here, my phone's on the desk, but it's face down. Yeah, great. Even better than that, it should not even be anywhere in sight, right?
mm,
But you're talking to someone and they're kind of like, yeah, and they've got their phone in their hand, or it's there and it's pinging and they're looking down, and, or something's happening around them that, you know, yes, it's a distraction, but it's not a big distraction. Like, the, the room's on fire or someone's bust through the door and needs help, it's just a distraction, right? And you've allowed yourself to be distracted and be not present. That would be an example for me. Happens all the
mm.
time.
What,
All the time.
but buildings on fire and buses going through the window.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean.
Just that moment where you kind of like, yeah, I'm talking to this person, but they're kind of not really there.
Yeah, yeah,
And like I say, this is obvious. Examples, these things. That's
yeah.
my dog on there, by the way.
Oh, nice.
And there'll be other sort of more subtle versions of that.
Yeah.
Um, what does good look like? Oh my goodness. You come away I guess the question to anyone listening to this is, have you ever had an instance where you've come away from a conversation or an interaction with someone and you go, wow, I feel really good. I feel really like they were 100% um, interested, curious in the
Mm,
moment,
mm,
that they were giving me all the right things on sort of being there, eye contact. Um, you get that feeling
mm.
of a very rich experience because of that.
Yeah. And it evokes trust as well, doesn't it? That's like
Yeah,
a wonderful byproduct of being listened to, is that you then trust that person, because, and which is going to have such a sort of a key, it's going to be such a key benefit to, if you are a leader of a person, if they can trust you, then you're going to have a far better relationship with that person, aren't you?
what a great point. Absolutely.
Mm,
And then what does that do, Dan? If you're being, you feel like trust is there, you're going to be okay to go back to that person, have another conversation.
mm,
You'll think, oh, you know what? I need to talk something through. Oh, I'm going to go to that person,
mm.
you know? Um,
Yeah.
and then it can become a real sort of fulfilling kind of rhythm of, yeah, now that person trusts you, you know, they're enjoying interactions with you, they're getting full benefit and real kind of rich experiences from it. You're having the same there because they respond to you better, and you're
Mm,
off, aren't you? You're off in this wonderful positive kind of dynamic that you've now got,
mm,
um, versus the opposite, where you think, yeah, they weren't really that interested, just wasting my time. what's the point of going and talking to them, because they're not really going to be listening. So
Yeah, it's so true.
or I've come away being told something or have something that was their agenda or their kind of perspective and take that wasn't really, and you go, well, actually, that's not really what I wanted. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So in terms of developing those skills then, developing the listening skills, what advice, what top tips have you got that leaders can do to develop their listening skills?
Yeah, what a great question. A lot in it, actually. I think I'm going to start with some of the obvious ones. Put your distractions aside,
Yeah.
the phone away, right? The Be in a space where you can actually have the best chance of being very focused on what you're doing, which is a
Mm.
conversation. We're having conversation here through the screen, which is great. But how amazing would this be to be in person, where
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've not got the things that you might go, oh, hang on, am I looking at the camera? Am I not looking at the camera? Am I? Because by the way, those things are going on right now.
Of
So I
course.
was, questioning myself of whether I am 100% in that space. So, giving yourself the best chance of being able to focus and listen and not be distracted. I mean, that sounds obvious. That's a given.
Mm.
Um, I thought about some of this stuff, Dan, that, and I've linked it to some other things that I think are really important here. And this is, timing, where you are yourself, the energy you've got at any given moment in time. If you're about to embark on a conversation, let's say this is a planned conversation, right? And
Mm.
we'll come on to the kind of ad hoc ones in a moment. A planned conversation, you know, going into it feeling ready, going into it feeling like you know, you're up for this, you've got the time for this.
Mm.
Otherwise, it's just going to be a disaster. You're going to feel like you need to rush it. You're not going to, you're thinking of the things you've got to do and not wait the moment you're in. Um, and the energy, and by the energy I mean sort of positive. You're not having one of those days where you know you're tired, you're stressed, you don't really want to be talking to anyone. It's that
Mm.
sort of thing. And I think that's really important, because we can assume that we can all do this and go, great, right, well, we just need to active listen here. Well, there's all sorts
Yeah.
of stuff that will
Doesn't
be
always
going
work.
on, either internally or around you. But the internal stuff, is at least give yourself the best chance of being able to succeed with this. Right frame of mind, have the time to do this. Because energy for me is linked to the ability to be able to focus on something or not focus on something.
Yeah.
Mm. So yeah, I'm really keen for us, as we're talking about these topics and exploring these in the sorts of roles we have and the sorts of development that we get involved in. And it's actually looking at some of that stuff as well, and not just the you know put your phone aside, make eye contact, nod at the right times. And, I think those sorts of things are okay. And that just shows that you are,
Yeah.
you are at the very least in the conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's some of the other stuff that can have a real bearing on it.
I realized then that you were saying, nodding at the right time. I literally was nodding at the right time just then. But, and so in terms of, are there any sort of exercises or activities that somebody could do to maybe either test their own listening skills or help bring those skills out? Is there anything that you've got at the top of mind that somebody could do as a sort of a practice?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start with a slightly alternative sort of thing of, not alternative, but that other element to this that I've just talked about with the
Yeah.
energy focus piece. Because I think there it's how can you train your mind or train yourself a little bit more to stay focused on something.
Yeah.
So if that's not something that you're particularly skillful at, then any activity where it's like, right, I'm going to, be singly focused on this to the exclusion of everything else. The world of mindfulness and any practice like that will help. If you're into that sort of thing. If you're not, then there's easy things you can do, like, next time you go for a walk, just try and look around and see things that you haven't, or hear things, the sort of stuff I'm talking about. But for those who don't, it's actually tuning into things that you haven't tuned in before. And the reason I'm saying that is all of that thing can create a little bit more of a habit of, being able to be aware.
Yeah.
Because I think if you're not aware, and you're easily distracted, then listening deeply and actively in a conversation is by default going to be a hard thing as well. Because we often have conversations where it's not, just you in a room locked away, nothing else happening. And, it can often be in a moment, or, even if it's a planned thing, there might be an unplanned thing that goes on. So, so that stuff around tuning, your mind in and focusing. Then there's things like, if you're used to talking a lot in meetings or in conversations, try not speaking for the first 5 minutes. See how that lands. Got a colleague who just the other day, when he was part of a team meeting we had, and 49 minutes went by without him saying anything. And they
Right.
said, I've done a lot of listening and it's been amazing. I've just spent 49 minutes of the hour listening. And he was invited in to say something. And he said, yeah, I've listened, and that's not something I normally do. And it's been an amazing experience. And I thought, wow,
right.
that's really cool. And he got so much more out of that meeting because he was understanding and listening to learn from others. So I think that's one thing as well, just practice silence and hearing from others if that's not your normal thing.
And I think there was something nice you were saying there about acknowledging, when to step back and listen. And also you talked about, creating the right environment. So, if you have got a lot going on in yours and somebody in your own world, and maybe stressed, and you may be finding it difficult to do those, to give somebody the listening that they deserve or need, then maybe would it be right to sort of step up and go, actually, I haven't got the capacity to listen to what you need right now. Is that something that would be, or would then that have a kind of a detrimental effect to go, maybe you see where I'm going with this, but I suppose it's like, so many of us are up against it so much of the time these days that sometimes, like you say, you need to create that environment in which to really listen to someone. If you haven't got that, you've got so much going on. Do you think that it would be a good idea or a bad idea to kind of postpone a meeting with someone to listen to what they need? What would you advice be there?
I think it'd be a good idea. I'm just trying to think, sort of, if you said to me, right, actually, I'd love to have this conversation, but right now I'm not in the right headspace and I want to be able to be fully in it. I mean, that's got to be a positive thing. Right?
Yeah.
I think, and that could take courage, couldn't it? To go,
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I'm not ready for this right now. I need to sort of postpone. And sure, it takes, setting something up again and what have you, but I'd like to think most people would be receptive to that. I certainly would be. I think actually it's a really, really good, tool in your armory, if that's the right expression, to tool in the toolbox to have, to being able to be so aware of yourself to go, actually, let's do this some other time because it's going to be of more benefit to both of us.
Yeah. Great. Well, we've pretty much reached our time now, so thank you very much for giving us your time, first of all. But we do have one last question before, and doesn't it just? We do have one last question before you leave us, which is a bit more of a personal question. which we ask at the end of all of our episodes, which is it's kind of a nice way to kind of find out a little bit more about you, and possibly impart some of your learnings over the years. So the question is, which you've probably heard before, if you were to look back on your career, if you were to start your career again, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Ooh. Now, I have been asked this before.
Yeah.
I'm going to go right to my younger self, because I think, career is kind of influenced by, things that were. So I was bullied at school.
Mm.
I'm just going to say that. I was bullied at school, and I was bullied because, my legs are a bit wonky and I'm not very good at soccer.
Right.
So, it often put me in, I mean, not just that, but, it was that kind of like, oh, you're the weaker one, we're going to pick on you. It's, usual thing.
Yeah.
And when I look back at that, I think, wow, what would be really good would be to tell myself, and this is hard, right? Yeah, don't worry about what they say. You got this. You're good. You've got a lot to do. You've got a lot to give outside of not being able to kick a football around. And have that belief in yourself.
Mm.
Because all that led to was, just me kind of just doing things on my own and seeking activities and sports that just wouldn't put me in the limelight. Now, oh, by the way, I've done some amazing things since, so it's not, it's not a sob story. It's just, going back to my younger self, just go, yeah, come on, you got this. And actually, and this is a really hard thing, and I think this does link to, a lot of stuff that we're talking about with leadership and the world of work and what have you, is how do you shut out all those negative things from others to allow you to kind of just stay true to who you are and what you can do. Yeah. Which links, back to, as a leader, if you can't listen intently to some of the stuff that not is just said, but is unsaid, and really understand a person, then you're not going to know some of that stuff. So actually, yeah, that would be my.
And it's so. I mean, I can relate so much to the kind of being bullied at school things. I think, and unfortunately, there's so many of us in the world that are subject to that, and often for me, I've always thought of it was horrible things to kind of go through, of course, when you're a kid, but there's a kind of a strange resilience that comes of it. And I think that people that have gone through stuff like that at such an early age probably are stronger. And I'm not suggesting it's a good thing necessarily, but I think there is that resilience that does come from it. You do develop a bit of a harder shell, but also at the same time, you kind of strive for a lot, that you go for things because you're like, I'm going to show them that they were wrong all that time. And I think that there's something to be said for that. Again, not saying that bullying is the right way to achieve things in life, but I think there's got to be some positives out of negatives. Hey, usually I throw that question back as to, do you still live by your advice that you've just given your younger self now? Would you say that you do live by your own advice?
More and more. It's taken a lifetime up to now, for sure.
Yeah.
And you can still, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the way you're wired, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, much more aware of it now, and much more able to kind of go, I'm not bothered by that. Hard, but I'm not bothered by that. Because, and then you leave it as their problem, not yours.
That's it.
You've actually made an impact on them, and you get to the mindset of they've not made an impact on you. So that's it's a choice thing. Yeah, absolutely,
and good advice to live by. Well, Greg, thank you ever so much for giving us your time. We'll let you get back to your evening. If you would like to find out more about what we've talked about today, then you'll find all of the links that you need in the description of where you found today's episode. So thank you once again to Greg Bartlett from Australia for joining me today. And until the next time, take care. Hey, you're on my mind.